Ecofictologists, welcome back to my channel. My name is Lovis, and today we are taking a deep dive into the TBR database that I created to support my TBR MASH game in finding titles that match my prompts. If you have no idea what I'm talking about, go and check out my TBR MASH playlist. This is my monthly TBR game, to be read game, that helps me choose the books that I'm going to read in the following month. And I did one for March and I did one for April. And in April's video, I also gave you a look at the TBR database and at the coding script that I wrote to parse all of that information to find the titles that match my prompts, because I am that much of a nerd. So if you're interested in that, go and check out April's TBR MASH video. Basically, I went through my massive Goodreads TBR, where I keep track of all the ecofiction titles that I come across, and I manually entered them into my TBR database with all the metadata needed to match my prompts in TBR MASH. That metadata includes the genre, the subgenre, the age category, where it's set, where the author is from, a little bit about the story, and a little bit about the publisher. I then wrote this handy bit of code that helps me go through all of that information and just picks out the titles that match those prompts. So that was pretty cool. To me, some of you have said that it was a bit overly complicated. You're not wrong, but it made me so happy, and it tickled all of my nerdy tendencies. So hopefully I can infect you with some of my excitement. That sounded weird. Moving on. But what I also did was write a bit of code that would show me graphically the spread of my TBR across genre, age category, where it's set, and where the author is from. And I wanted to share that with you today. One, because I think it's interesting, and two, because I get most of my recommendations from social media or from articles that are like top 10 in this category, or for example. And so any biases in my TBR, yes, represents my own biases for where I seek out titles, but also I think does represent the biases in the social media that I come across. And so that's, and any bias is worth pointing out. So that's why we're here. And that is why I am all the way over frickin' here, because I'm going to show you a bunch of stuff over here. Okay, let's tackle genre first. This is kind of what I expected. There's a lot of speculative fiction in ecofiction, and I class that under sci-fi. So I actually expected sci-fi to be my top ranking genre, but contemporary is way up there. And I think that is probably mostly due to all the mysteries that I have added to the TBR list. I am finding so many mystery and crime books that have ecological themes in them, which I'm very excited about, but those are all contemporary. So that is probably what is pushing that genre way up. As I said, sci-fi includes all of the speculative fiction that I come across, so all the dystopias, all the solar punk, all the what if this happened kind of stories, so it's fairly broad. Now, what I am excited to see is that while I don't have as many fantasy titles, I do still have a fair few, and that would include anything from magical realism through anthropomorphic fantasy, urban fantasy, all the way up to epic fantasy with like nature magic and stuff. So I'm very excited to see this many titles in my TBR, because as you know, I'm a fantasy person. Moving on to age categories, this is a little bit more surprising to me. For some reason, I have it in my head that YA is everywhere, that it's super popular, it's super pervasive, everything is YA. But look, I have almost twice as many adult titles as YA titles. And if we look within each genre, we see that sci-fi has way more adult titles than YA titles, and same with contemporary, and in fact it's even more pronounced in contemporary. And so the top two ranking genres both have more adult titles than YA, which makes sense. But in fantasy, yes, there are fewer titles, but I have way more YA in fantasy than anything else. And actually, it's followed closely by middle grade, and adult is trailing way behind. Middle grade in general is where I have the fewest titles, but fantasy is where I have the most middle grade. Fantasy and sci-fi seem to dominate the YA and middle grade space, while contemporary and sci-fi dominate the adult space. Sci-fi seems to be doing well across all groups. That speculative element seems to resonate with people of all ages. So the next aspect I was really interested in was where the stories were set. As I was inputting the data, I got the feeling that North America would win this one, and I was right. Second highest is Europe, is also not that surprising, but what I am very shocked at is how few titles I have from pretty much anywhere else in the world. Africa, Asia, Oceania, and South America, they all have fewer than 20 titles in my database. That is very sad. I am very sad about that. I have absolutely nothing against stories set in North America, of course. I have loved many of them, but since that is kind of the publishing hub of the world, I have to consciously seek out stories from elsewhere to get some different perspectives. If we take a peek into each genre, they're all dominated by North American stories. Most of them followed closely by Europe, except for sci-fi. The region of Oceania, which includes kind of Australia and New Zealand, they're really bringing it in the sci-fi realm. But where it does get interesting is if we look into age categories. Now, most adult and YA stories are set in North America, but most middle grade stories are set in Europe. And North America is not outcompeting Asia and South America by all that much. So that's kind of encouraging. It looks like each region publishes mostly adult, but then half of them publish more YA and half of them publish more middle grade. That's interesting. I mean, bear in mind that some of these regions have very few titles, going back to, the biases in my spread there. So just take a look at the y-axis and take this with a pinch of salt, but if I keep it to qualitative statements like more and most and things like that, I should be fairly safe, but statistically speaking, this is a very poor sample size. It's a similar picture if we look at where the author is actually from. Obviously, an author can set their story anywhere in the world, but looking at where they're from kind of gives you an idea of the range of perspectives you might be getting, and that is an even bleaker picture. Oh my word. North America still dominates in all of these genres, followed by Europe, although in fantasy and sci-fi, them European authors are catching up. But if we look at each region and what authors from that region are writing, it gets a bit interesting. Contemporary and sci-fi are really vying for that top spot, and again, most European writers are writing for middle grade readers, followed closely by adult. And in all other regions, adult is the most common. It looks like most authors set their stories in the places where they're from, although European authors seem to be a bit adventurous, setting their stories all over the place, with authors from other regions only branching out to a few other places, which is interesting. The last thing I want to look at are books that are independently published, and in this database that means they're either self-published or they're published through small independent publishing houses. It looks like overall there's an almost completely even spread, which is good. Looks like the genre split isn't too bad either, and across the age categories it's fairly even, with a bit of an opposite skew going on where more adult titles are published by big publishers and more YA titles are independently published. Okay, there's one area where I'm not doing too bad with spread. So what can we take from these stats and these graphs? That my TBR is severely biased. Because I get most of my recommendations from Instagram in particular, and from web pages where I search like middle grade ecofiction, and they give me a list of the top 10 titles or something like that. I think some of this does reflect a bit of a bias in general in the media that I see, the resources that I come across. A huge exception to this, and an absolutely incredible resource, is the Round the World in 80 Books, a two-part series on Medium that Mary Woodbury wrote. It's great. It gives you titles from all over the world. It gives you 80 titles in each list. And I thought I had included some of those in here, but now I'm thinking maybe I haven't added them to my Goodreads list, so I need to go back, and hopefully that will help me out with some of my skew issues. And of course, another huge caveat is that I am reading in English. So what I can get really depends on what has been either written in or translated into English. There could be an absolute heap of ecofiction novels in all of these other regions that I don't see because I don't speak that language. Again, these are the stats of my TBR database. This is not, even though I do think it has been influenced by a lot of the media and resources that I see, this is not supposed to say that this is reflective of the genre of ecofiction everywhere. I know I see a lot of books written in German, which I can read, and I know there is a big ecofiction scene in Germany, so I imagine that is the same in other languages as well. I mean, our first solar punk anthology came from Brazil, in Britain, not in English. So I imagine that is the case with other languages as well, 100%. And I'm not expecting everything to be equal, right, for that exact reason, but I would prefer them all to be well represented, you know, in each, because I know that there are titles that I could find in each region, in each genre, in each age category. I just haven't looked hard enough. I think the biggest takeaway is at the moment my TBR is not reflecting what is available out there for me. So it has highlighted some areas of improvement for me, some regions to spend some more time looking for titles, and I'm so glad I put this TBR database together. The data does not lie, people, the data does not lie, and it gave me an excuse to completely nerd out and write some more code. I will take any excuse, literally any. So now my question to you, ecofictologists, is how balanced do you think your TBR is? And of course, your TBR will probably be a lot more tailored to your tastes and your genre preferences than mine is, because I am trying to get a well-rounded view of the whole genre. But have you ever thought about it? Do you think it matters? Do you think you should make an effort to try and get a balanced view? Let me know down in the comments below. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. I post every Wednesday talking all about reading and writing ecofiction and how it can be used as a science communication tool. If you like what I do and would like to support me, then head on over to patreon.com/ecofictology and become a patron, where your monthly donation buys me lots of books, which I love, but also supports Love the Oceans, a marine conservation organization operating out of Mozambique. And if you're looking for a little bit of community around your ecofiction, then join us on our Rewilding Our Stories Discord server, where we are having loads of fun conversations about ecofiction in all its wonderful forms, and the invite link is in the description below. And that is all from me. Happy reading, and I will see you next week, ecofictologists. Africa, Asia, Oceania. Why can't I say that? Oceania.